Is everything up and running?
Ujani.
Okay, so we'll begin with a short prayer. Heru makiru, Heru makiru, Heru makiru, Heru makiru, Duara sara set Heru, Duara sara set Heru, Duara sara set Heru, Duara sara set Heru. Om hatap 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 hatap. Puja, greetings. It's getting warm here again in St. Croix. So you'll be seeing me more in t-shirts than in my, the shirts that I wear for classes and things like that. So in any way, we're going to do verse 14 tonight. And I want to take time with it because it's very significant. So we're going to slow the pace a little bit and deal with this, work with this one line. To put things in context, we're going to review line 13, and then we're going to get into a line 14. Ra, Jeref, An, Heru Behudet, Ra, En, Ke, Areru, Mu, Nemet, Sehetet. And we're going to go directly to the philosophical posit. This philoposit means is short of philosophical posit. Vaira, that is to say that spirit consciousness as Heru Behudet, thus Heru Behudet is manifesting as spirit consciousness to engage with the enemies of Set. Heru Behudet is as Ra, the consciousness of spirit. Ra has said to Heru Behudet, as to thou, collect your grapes and their seeds, thus the primordial constitutes that which sustains and nourishes your fortitude from within unobjectified consciousness, the primordial, and go forth being adorned in placid, peaceful, and calm mind, as this, the primordial consciousness, from which one has obtained one's sustenance, is a causative factor for a calm, peaceful mind. So Sehetet, yeah, this is a term you should become familiar with. Sehetet means to cause peace, or she, the causative factor that brings about peace. Ara, the serpent goddess, causes. Now, line 14, remember the phrase, collect your grapes, is figurative. What it means is collect what sustains you, or gather what sustains you. And if you gather something, then you bring them together. So if you gather your opposites, you are submerged in unobjectified consciousness. And that this idea of the moon is going to come up again. This is a very important aspect of the myth, this aspect of moon. So now, Jetu, earth, Heard and Mu. So here is Mu again. And Mu means a water, but it's being used as a metaphor. And we'll talk more about that as we go along. Kan Heru Behudet. Heard as Ramen. So heard as Ramen. Heru Behudet is made by the hawk and the tooth, the D and the T, and the symbol for city. So Heru Behudet as Ramen. Heru, the sun disk with the dot in the middle, is being pronounced as Heru. Or Heru. Heru as Ramen. Heru Penum Benti. So Benti and Heru again and Ramen Heru. So tie, so this term, jetu, means to tie or to bind. So tie binding personality to water of Heru Behudet, Fei Shi, to the extent light is this Benti, light to the extent light. So the term Ramen, here's Ramen, R-M-N, so Ramen. So it appears twice in the line, once here, and once here. So here, Ramen, S Ramen, and Ramen. Okay. To the extent like this, Benti, like to the extent of. And the term Mu, you're going to underline it for now. Let's bold it and underline it. So Mu directly translate into water, but it's being used here as a metaphor. What it means is it means, think about water, think about an ocean. You know, it's vast, it's fluid-like, and there's really no discernible objects. The waves are objects, but think about how when you see an ocean and it's very calm and placid, that's what the Mu is referring to. Like a watery mass that is unobjectified. So this idea of the Mu is being brought forth from verse 13. Remember, we met Mu here. Unobjectified. So obviously, when you're reading these, when you're going through these texts and you're reading these things, you have to look for the theme or the takeaway or the highlight that the sages are bringing about, what they're trying to explain. So they're talking about, so they brought up Mu here, and then they brought up Mu in the succeeding line again. So obviously this is going to be important to us. The concept of Mu. Okay, so now let's read the philosophical passage. So remember that this is not really a word, It's an abbreviation of a concept that I created, which is the philosophical posse. So because I don't want to write it out because it's so long, I just call it philoposse. A tying or binding of the personality to unobjectified consciousness, as Heru Behudet is the face of this unobjectified consciousness. That is to say, unobjectified consciousness is the face of the all-encompassing transcendent reality. Thus, Heru Behudet emerges as unobjectified consciousness as a singular principle of the transcendent reality. She, Arat, the serpent goddess, causes him to reach to the extent of spiritual enlightenment. This is the effect of the process of Benti of spirit consciousness, inculcating the energies, processes, and powers of Arat, which allows one to reach to the extent of spiritual enlightenment in a single lifetime. So it is a process of Benti consciousness that allows the spiritual evolutionary development to a degree that one achieves spiritual enlightenment. And the term that we're using, that we're translating to spiritual enlightenment, this term, spiritual enlightenment, spiritual enlightenment, spiritual enlightenment. That term is Heru. And Heru is made by the circle with the dot in the middle. Heru. So Heru means light. So spiritual light. So we went in reverse. We went from the philoposse to the transliteration to showing what the glyph is for the term. So what we have is that here, Arat, the serpent goddess, causes a tying or binding of the personality to unobjectified consciousness. Let's find a color for her. Oh, Benet is having trouble with, that's a good color. A tying or binding of the personality to unobjectified consciousness. And so this is the operative process of the goddess, the serpent goddess. And remember, we showed her as the serpent that is coming up to the center of the forehead. She has a posture, a yoga posture, a Sima yoga posture. She has a teaching. Yeah, here we're talking about her metaphysical capacity or her metaphysical effect. And so that is, it's a good way of putting it, her metaphysical effect. And this effect, I kind of like that. This metaphysical effect is causing an awareness to develop within your personality. So it is through the process that she causes it. So think about what it means to bind to something. If someone ties you to a pole, or moors you to a boat, or how boats moor at a dock, they're tied at the dock, and they can't go anymore. They can't go anywhere. They're moored. So when boats go to a dock, they get moored to the dock by a rope that ties them to the dock. They get moored, so they can't move. So think about how it would be if you were tied, Jetu, if you were tied to the moon, you would be moored. You would be you will not be separate from it. You would be tied to it, and so it's a linkage. But obviously, this linkage is occurring within you. Um, you have to think of it as a process or something that is occurring within. So you have if we look at it from the perspective of Anunian theology, you have your lower divinities, or your human divinities. That's Asar, Aset, Heru, Set, Nebuchadnezzar, Heru, those are your human divinities. And from there, if you go up the chain, then you have your cosmic divinities. And your lower cosmic divinities are Geb and Nut. And then you have your higher cosmic divinities, which are Shu and Tefnut. And then you have Ra as the creator spirit at the top. Where you have Kepri as the primordial, meaning that which the cosmic divinities have emerged from. So the cosmic divinities have emerged from unobjectification, and they then therefore have become objectified as the cosmic forces. But if you were to go from your human divinities to your cosmic divinities, you'd be becoming more and more subtle, and then you would dissolve into not the transcendent yet. You'll be dissolved into unobjectification, and it is that unobjectification that's where the goddess moors you to that. Yeah, how she does that? She opens your energy centers. She allows your consciousness to expand, so that you're able to go beyond your cosmic being self, and to discover your unobjectified self. So you're laid out like the ocean, the placid, calm ocean with no waves within the ocean. You're unobjectified. And it is that unobjectification that is the face, as Heru Behudet is the face of this unobjectified consciousness. So, one color it. So, Heru Behudet is the face of this unobjectification, meaning that there is an entity, a being, or reality that is beyond unobjectification. So unobjectification is not the full enlightenment as yet. It is certainly a very high, a very elevated attainment, but it's not the full attainment. But think about how it would be if you were to be unobjectified. That's an enlightenment process that is already taking place. And the point is that this is occurring within. And in this class, I emphasize that more than any of the other classes, because we're talking about mythological principles. But the idea I'm trying to get across to you is that these mythological principles are archetypes of your personality. They're not mythological principles outside of yourself. The problem with normal human consciousness is that they don't realize, the normal human consciousness cannot realize that there's a deeper underlying reality to its ego-centered self. And so they don't realize that deep within them is the moon. And they can't realize that because the ego is too concretized. And you need a process, a serpent power process, to break you out of your ego so that you can advance towards unobjectification. And therefore, like you wear a mask, or actors and actresses wear masks in theater, the divine wears a mask, and that mask is unobjectified consciousness. And the shape of that mask, or the principle of that mask, is Heru Behudet. So Heru Behudet is manifesting as the mask over transcendental consciousness. So Heru Behudet is a principle that is reflecting transcendental consciousness. And therefore, when a spiritual practitioner discovers unobjectified consciousness, they are discovering something of the transcendent, but not the transcendent itself yet. Like if you were to wear a mask, there would be something of, and you're acting, there'll be something of your personality, but that is not your personality. That is not the true reality of your personality. You have to remove the mask to see the true reality of your personality. And therefore, honor objectification is a mask overlaying the transcendent reality. You follow that? And so a very high attainment is to realize that you are something that is unobjectified. And if you go deeper, you'll find out, you'll discover the transcendent reality behind that unobjectification. So in reality, you are not, in reality, you're not a human being, really. You know, for the purposes of time and space existence, we use the term as human beings, and people should develop good human nature and, you know, become aristocratic in nature and you know, refined, good mannered human beings. But that is not the true you. That is, you are like an actor in a play. You're not a human being. That might be a little difficult to hear, but if you reflect on that deeply, Because what is a human being anyway? If we look at it from that perspective, a human being is made up of uh, protoplasm, cells, which have their own molecular structure. You have organs and blood and sinew and mucus and pus and urine and feces, all. And not only that, what about the little microbes and little that live on your body that you can't get all cleaned off? And, they live in your eyelids and things like that. So you're a mass of of living matter as a human being, as a human being is. And but if you but if and then is that the pinnacle of you? Is that the highest nature of yourself? To be this stinky, smelly, protoplasmic entity that you have to shower, you have to bathe every day, and things like that. In reality, you are something other than that. You're something way beyond. The glory of you is way beyond your physical nature. Light years away, even more than light years away from your physical nature. And the hint of that is the moon. The moon gives you the clue to the reality of that which is transcendent of the the moon itself. And so Heru Behudet is the expression of that transcendent reality in the realm of unobjectification. So these are powerful concepts to try to understand. And so these are things that spiritual practitioners need to reflect upon. So you can see how actually elevated this teaching is, and how how profound. So the whole idea is to gain insight in verse 14, which was introduced in verse 13, gain insight into unobjectification. So if we go back to verse 13, just to give you an idea of the process of what's going on. So we're going to take this off. Earth, moon, Nemet, bird, Earth, moon, Nemet, bird, and here's the per. So you can say either way. Put it like this. So move bird. So and go forth, being adorned and calm mind, as this the primordial consciousness. And go forth, being adorned in placid, peaceful, and calm mind, as this the primordial consciousness. So from within, unobjectified consciousness. And it is told that the unobjectified consciousness is where you gather your sustenance, and this is what nourishes and sustains and guides your fortitude. So what it's saying is that the unobjectified is where you are strengthened in the process of spiritual evolution. It's where you are sustained, where you are nourished. So if you go there, it's like you're drinking sweet grapes juice, but the what you're being nourished with is the the experience of being unobjectified. That is what you're being nourished with. Is what you're doing is that you're breaking down or you're dismantling the ego, the effect of the ego in its process of concretizing. You follow? So the effect of the ego that is causing you to ascertain yourself as an individual. And in reality, you're not individual, like was said before. How can you be individual? You're not even human. So this idea of being individual is, and that's what it means to be, and that's what it means that your human nature is illusory. That's what it means to be. That's what we're referring to when we're saying that it's illusory. Because in reality, you are not individual. How can you be individual when you are when in your higher nature you are unobjectified, and in your true nature you are transcendent. You are nebular, essentially, actually. So if you so you go here and to receive the nourishment which gives you a kind of, it backs you up, it gives you a kind of impetus to continue, because you do that one time and it dawns on you, I'm really not an individual. If I just had this experience where I'm experiencing myself as an ocean of consciousness, then how is it possible for me to be an individual? So you're breaking down the ego, and that's the kind of the thought process that you go through. And then if you do that enough times, what you're really doing is that you're cleansing your unconscious of the pollutant of individuality. And a few years ago, I was getting a lot of questions about this idea of individuality. It is hard for the mind to let go of the idea that you are an individual human being. But if you are experiencing your unobjectified self, then forget it. You're to continue in that train of thought, or that train of belief, it then becomes insanity, really. And so a strong clinging to your sense of individuation is actually a symptom of insanity. It's not an insanity where you're going to be out on the street, or you're going to be killing people and cutting up their bodies and things like that. But it's a level of insanity because you're not really objectified. The idea of yourself as being objectified is an effect of the ego and nothing else. And that effect of the ego is illusory because that effect is essentially temporary, it's transient and temporary, and you can break through that. And what happens is that you, in that state, you're completely calm, you're completely placid. So it causes your mind to become calm. So going forth into the mu causes your mind to become calm. And that's the Sehetep, which is brought about by Arat, the goddess. And what they mean by that is the serpent power goddess. And so she helps to bring about your dissolution of opposites. Because if you are unobjectified, it means that you are non-dual. If you are dual, then you're objectified. If you're non-dual, you're unobjectified. And so the whole idea is to discover your unobjectified nature, which is there all the time, has always been there, will always be there. It's just that you have to develop your mind in a way that you're able to realize that reality, which is beyond the scope of cognition. You certainly can think about it, but you're not. And your mind helps you to experience it. But when you get there, you have to realize that your mind essentially is turned off. There is mind there, but mind is non-operable. It's the anritav state. There's no generation, there's no mind, there's no, there is mind essence, but not mind function. There is no cognition. And so you can't create anything if the mind is not working. Now, when you start to think again, and that's why you can't stay there perennially, because your mind is going to start thinking again, and then you're going to come back to your body. You'll have that experience, but the mind has come back. And so you have to keep going back and keep going back and keep going back. And that's the only way you're going to truly break through of it, if you keep going back and keep going back. So in verse 14, it is, in verse 13, it is telling you that that's where you go for your nourishment. In verse 14, it is telling us that that is the face of Heru, the face of the transcendent, is the mu is the face of Heru Behudet. And so it's the face of the transcendent. That is to say, unobjectified consciousness is the face of the all-encompassing transcendent reality. So that is the process. That is the key. So let's go forward. So verse 14 is a big key, and all of the lines are coming out with these very powerful powerful teachings is from the get-go. This text is really, it's really elevated. It's really up there. It's like extremely elevated. Hey, you have to put this in context within the context of the divinity of our temple. That, you know, goddess Net, she is the one that proclaims the victory for Heru, and this is what she's talking about. You know, when she tells the company of gods and goddesses that Heru ought to be the one on the throne, what she's really saying is that Heru is the true reality behind the ego. Stop sharing for a moment. Before I forget, Marty Middleton, give me a call when after class. Don't worry, you're not in trouble.
Uja, okay.
I'm trying to pull something up. It's taking a little while to load. And as usual, okay, here we go. I'm trying to show something to bring it all home. Yes. Okay. So you have to remember all of these divinities are aspect. All of these aspects of Heru are aspects of the one Heru. So remember what Goddess Net says. She says, give the office of Osiris to his son Horus. So Osiris is a Greek name for the god Asar, and Horus is the Greek name for the god Heru. So we're talking about the same divinity. Do not go on committing these great wrongs, which are not in place, or I will get angry, and the sky will topple to the ground. But also tell the Lord of all, the bull who lives in Anu, to double Set's property, give him Anak and Astarte, your two daughters, and put Horus in the place of his father. So Goddess Net is the one who tells the Aeneid. In this line, she's actually discussing the issue with the other gods and goddesses, because Ra disagreed with the assertion that Heru should be sitting should be bequeathed the throne of Osiris. And the other gods and goddesses went along with him. And Jehuti entreated and to find out what Goddess Net thought about all of this. And this is what she told him. She told him, you better give the throne to Heru. And basically what she's saying is that the ego must be given its due, but that Heru is the true reality of the soul. And therefore it should not be uh, it should not be left unrecognized or unacknowledged. And that's what most people do. They leave the soul unrecognized and unacknowledged, and therefore they live a life of delusion, which is called ignorance. And so within the context of the line verse 14 that we're talking about, what's happening here is that she is recognizing that Heru is the true reality of the soul. Because remember in verse 5, it is told that Heru Behudet is a manifestation of a star. And she is saying that Heru ought to have the throne of a star. So she is acknowledging that Heru is essentially spirit being. And the reason why she can say that is because of what's going on here in verse 14, is that Heru Behudet is the face of unobjectified consciousness, and therefore is the overlaying reality on transcendent reality. And so when you're asking Goddess Net to remove her veil, you're asking her to realize that you are the face of transcendent reality. You are Heru Behudet. And that the throne is a transcendental reality. And it's rightfully yours because you are its face. You are its exudation, if you want to use that kind of term. Thus, Heru Behudet emerges as unobjectified consciousness as a singular principle of the transcendent reality. So let's match that up with spiritual enlightenment. The Heru Behudet emerges as the transcendent reality emerges as a singular principle, which is the Mu. Okay. She, Arat, the serpent goddess, causes him to reach the extent of spiritual enlightenment. So to the extent is Remen, which means to the extent of. So what it's saying is that she causes him to reach and when it says to the extent of spiritual enlightenment, It means the very boundary of spiritual enlightenment. So closing in on it, getting close to the boundary. So there's a spiritual enlightenment process that is already taking place, and this process, it can be likened to if you witness the sun. That here in St. Croix, it's very easy to witness the sunrise in the morning without obstruction, like nothing in the way. You go to this, you go to the east end of the island, the very east, all the way. There's this place called Point Udo. You know, you can Google it, look it up, and you can actually see the sunrise and how it looks like it's coming out of the ocean. And so this enlightenment process is like that. That the sun just doesn't come up and it's in the midday sun, you know, with all its full glory and full power. It has a process. It comes up very gradually, 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 gradually. And as it is coming up, it's getting more effulgent and hotter, more effulgent and hotter, more effulgent and whole and whole and whole. Until midday, you have a full, hot, blaring, powerful light that has inundated the land and has removed all darkness. Similarly, the process of spiritual enlightenment is like that. You have to reach the boundary, you have to reach the threshold, and then it builds and builds and builds and builds and builds, and it continues to grow. So you reach to the extent of spiritual enlightenment. And that extent, that boundary that you're reaching is the moon. Well, once you've reached the moon, now you have entered into where the sun is rising up. If you want to use that metaphor, it's a good metaphor to use. Where the sun is rising up. You can see the effect. Okay, see, you can experience the effect of the process of your submersion in the what is unobjectified. And so your spirit consciousness is emerging, it's coming up, it's fledgling, starting to thrive. And that process of it coming up, starting to thrive and growing, that's the process of Heru Behudet. That's the emergence that's coming into full reality. So this is the metaphysical effect of the process of Benti. So recall Benti of spirit consciousness. So let's stop there for a moment and find a different color. So the light gray. Okay. So recall in verse 13, verse 12 actually. Right, we met Benti. Benti Heru Behudet is the beautified aspect of Heru Behudet as that aspect of illuminating spirit that is inundating the essence of Heru Behudet. Okay, so keeping that in mind, what's happening here is that, what's happening here is that principle of that aspect of Heru Behudet, that is the inner consciousness of spirit, is uh, is is being infused, uh, and think of it like this: uh, you have an egg. Probably use a better one. You have a seed, and you have the center of the seed, and you have the covering go over the seed, and it's the center that actually comes out and grows into a tree. So you have to think of Benti as the spirit essence within Behudet, the spirit consciousness within Behudet, that is now the principal causative factor that is bringing about this reaching the extent, or allowing the extent of spiritual enlightenment to be approached. So it's that consciousness of spirit within Heru that is allowing this process to I don't want to use the word manifest itself. It's more of an evolution, or a progression, or a kind of emergence of something that is already there, that is now being revealed. And that is Benti. And that, therefore, this is a threshold that is being approached, because that inherent spirit consciousness is within Heru Behudet, which is the face of unobjectified consciousness. So within unobjectified consciousness is the consciousness of spirit itself. And because that is so, then there is an approach to a spiritual enlightenment, which is a transcendent, which is spirit being essence. And therefore, it is that is inculcating the energies and the processes of the powers of Arat. So Arat is yeah. So you have to think of Arat is taking this spirit principle as her energy process. That is, she's taking that principle as a process that is revealing the higher consciousness to the mind. So you can think of it as the fuel that she is operating through, that is allowing the emergence for the approach to the extent of spiritual enlightenment. Which allows one to reach the extent of spiritual enlightenment in a single lifetime. So it is a process of Benti consciousness that allows the spiritual evolutionary development to a degree that one achieves spiritual enlightenment. And so this is what we're just talking about. It is the Benti consciousness within the Behudet that is, but saying it like that, the Benti consciousness and Behudet are inseparable. It's not like there's one and the other. So you have to think about, let's say a pancake. All of the constituents of the pancake is within the pancake itself. So you can't have the constituents, you can't have the pancake without its constituents. Similarly, you cannot have Behudet without spirit consciousness. And therefore, the spirit consciousness is a constituent of Behudet. And it is that spiritual consciousness which is within the Behudet that is driving the Arat and is causing the reach to the extent of spiritual, of the transcendent. Okay, so I hope I explained that okay. I know it's a lot of technical language and things like that. But if you really think about it and you kind of reflect on it, it's a very profound philosophical teaching. Okay, so that will be it for this evening. Are there any questions?
We'll just say who.
Uja.
Heru Behudet has the hawk face. Asar has the hawk face. Ra has the hawk face. So, as I recall, Heru Behudet and Asar are aspects of Ra. They're one and the same. Correct?
You can look at it that way. It really depends on what, how you're looking at it, but generally speaking, yes.
So my question is, if they're one and the same, how can Ra not acknowledge Heru Behudet?
That's a good question. That's a very good question. So, think of it this way: if uh, if you are striving for something, and you are like when we were in school, and a teacher found a student that was a very good student, and the student can come up to the teacher with a B plus, and the teacher is the student can come up to the teacher with a B plus, and everyone else in the class makes a C, and the student feels good about himself or herself. And she goes up to the teacher, oh, I made a B plus, I'm so happy. And the teacher is like, what are you talking about? It's only a B plus. And so so what would that cause the student to do? It causes the student to reflect and go back and try harder until it actually comes back with its full potential, which is the A plus. Similarly, Heru, it has the potential for the throne of Asar, but if he is not fully equipped to sustain that reality, then he'll fall back into the world. He'll fall back into allowing Set to gouge out his eyes, and he cutting off his mother's head and things like that. So he has to be sufficiently tested and sufficiently trained to sustain the higher consciousness of himself, within himself as a son. So spirit is not going to give it to you because essentially you're spirit. Spirit is going to give it to you when you've proven that you can sustain that consciousness and you have fully done away with your ego.
So on a certain level, Ra is not acknowledging Behudet. Not that he is not acknowledging, he's just not publicly acknowledging to motivate Heru Behudet to go further.
Not publicly. I mean, he said it right out in front of the other gods and goddesses.
But that was only after he was pressured into it.
No, what I'm saying is that he refused to give Heru the throne in front of all the other gods and goddesses. So he publicly acknowledged to the gods and goddesses that this is not for Heru yet.
Neat. But you said that it was done to motivate Heru to work harder. So it's not that it's not known, it was strategy.
That's an interesting way of putting it. But think of it this way. You can reach a high level and then you can fall back into the world. And so you can reach a high level and you can think, oh, I've attained, I'm so high, I'm great, I'm wonderful, and you fall back into the world. And all that means is that you're not ready to remain there. And so if you are not ready to remain there, it will not be given to you. It will not be, because you're not ready to be acknowledged as yet, because you're not that as yet. You haven't attained it as yet. What is acknowledged is the underlying reality. Like let's use a guy like Trump. So let's go even more probably more acute to drive the point home. Let's look at a guy like Derek Chauvin, who killed another human being in front of the whole world, essentially. He is essentially one with the divine. Essentially, he is just like all of us. He is one with Nebuchadnezzar, right? But would you go up to him and tell him you are one with Nebuchadnezzar and you are to be looked at as a spiritual aspirant, and you are to be looked at as a royal personality who is going through the spiritual process and all of that? No, because it's not attained, has not reached that level. So that's what Ra is saying. Ra is saying, what you've done thus far is good, but you're not attained yet. You have not reached that level yet. So you have to go back and do some more work. So the inner reality is acknowledged. What is not acknowledged, because it is not there, is the fulfillment of that inner reality.
So although Ra was able to kind of realize that Heru was not ready, it was Heru. Could Heru have a kind of intuitive awareness, or an aspirant have an intuitive awareness of one's lack of readiness? Like, I know deep down I'm not ready yet.
That's an interesting question, because the answer to the question is yes and no. Because a student can think, I'm not ready yet, and they're actually ready. That happens. And so the spiritual teacher have to point out to them that you're actually ready, it's just that you haven't realized it yet. And so that the kind of thinking within the student that I am not ready yet, a student who is ready and believes he's not ready yet, is still covered by the delusion of believing that he's not ready yet or she's not ready yet. So the teacher has to introduce the student to the idea that they are ready. So it's something that the teacher recognizes that the student cannot recognize for him or herself. Other times, a student can recognize that they're not ready and that be true. Other times, a student can say they're not ready and they're actually ready. So it depends on the situation of each person.
I think, I'm thinking sometimes one can pick up from the teacher that without the teacher having to say it directly, kind of thing.
Well, certainly, sometimes the teacher says things and in a way for the student to try to understand. And if the student is able to, they can get it. But these are not universal ideas. Sometimes a teacher can say something and the student doesn't get it. And sometimes the teacher will not change course. They'll keep speaking in an abstract manner to help the student to think through it and to realize it for him or herself. Other times, a student might need to hear it because that's where the student is, might need to hear it in a more concrete way. And the teacher says it in a more concrete way. So a student might say it the teacher might say it in an abstract way and the student doesn't get it. And the teacher will not change because saying it in an abstract way is actually helping you more than if you were to come out, if the teacher were to come out and say it concretely. So from the perspective of a teacher, you have to know the student's symbolism and try to guide the student in a way that will help the student to grow through it. Because really the teacher cannot do the enlightened experience for you. That's something that you have to do on your own. The teacher can guide you and show you and teach you how to do it, but you have to do it on your own. So sometimes a teacher will not tell you. I mean, this has happened to me. You go to the teacher, you ask them a straight question, and you get some kind of answer, like you're wondering, like, what's going on here? And it's a way of helping the student that the student doesn't recognize. But in this day and time, a teacher can do that with a student, and the student engender negative feelings towards the teacher because they think the teacher don't care and don't want to answer their question or help them and things like that. There's a lot of psychological issues and egoism can actually block the nuance and the subtlety of what the teacher is trying to explain. So it's not always black and white. In fact, it's more gray than black and white because the black and white is not really helpful in most cases. That's why you have myths and parables, because the student has to go through a psychological process. And if you say it concretely, then you will remove the psychological process. So you have to give it in a way that the student can go through the psychological process. You follow? Okay.
Who just say who?
Mm-hmm.
So what you're saying is it's more important that Heru Behudet realizes his capacity for bin than Ra or anybody else's acceptance. It's more about the student's realization.
Generally, yes. But remember how you started off this discussion. You started out this discussion by acknowledging that all of these divinities are actually aspects of one divinity. So there is something within that is acknowledging that Heru is not ready for it yet. So there's something within that is signaling that Heru is not ready. And when that happens within a spiritual aspirant, then a spiritual struggle emerges, or a spiritual struggle continues. And that could be, let's take a gross example. That could be a student can reach a very high level and still have anger issues, right? And so the student cognitively believes that he or she should be going higher. But there is a principle that's going to hold that back until that student is able to work through that anger issue, to be released from it. So what you're saying generally is correct. The student has to work it through him or herself. And from the student-teacher perspective, the teacher is to help the student work it out. But what this teacher is doing really is helping the student work out these principles within themselves that is operating. So it's not something that is outside imposing. It's something that is inside, that you have an internal conflict. And so that conflict has to be resolved. And only you really can resolve that conflict with the help of the teacher, of course. But trying to resolve that conflict without a teacher is like trying to build a spaceship without going to college and taking physics and things like that.
Understood. Do it for the clarity.
Mm-hmm. Okay, aspirant Vinay. Is it like an egg waiting to hatch? We know what's in the egg to come, but the timing of the reveal has yet to come. That's an interesting way of putting it. It's an interesting way of putting it. It's actually it's very, I would say it's very good. And the reason why is let's say the egg, the essence of the egg is always there, right? Let's say a chicken egg. But if the mother doesn't sit on the chicken egg and keeps it warm and protects it from all of the other animals that can get to it and kill it and so forth, it'll never hatch. So it needs a proper environment for the chick to come out, for it to hatch. Similarly, you need the proper environment for your spiritual evolution to take place. You need a proper environment, you need proper warmth, you need proper protection, you need a whole proper environment to take place. So it's not directly related to this principle we're talking about, but it's peripherally related. And so if you think about it this way, if you don't have the proper nourishing environment, if you don't have classes, if you don't have teachings, those are sort of external environments. If you don't have proper internal environment, if you don't have meditation practices, if you don't have chanting, all of this is the chicken sitting on her egg, warming it, curating it, getting it ready, and then it comes out. So when Ra is telling Heru, you're not ready yet, Heru needs to He needs more sitting under the chicken. So I can see it that way. Yes. Meaning there's more work to be done. There's more meditation, more concentration, more cleansing, more purification of ego, all of that work. Okay, anything else? So you can see verse 14 is also a very important line. So next week, verse 15 and perhaps 16. But these lines are dense, they're rich with lots of philosophy. Okay, so we'll close out with a closing prayer. If there are no other questions. Heru makeru. 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 Om Hattab, 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 Hattab. Dua everyone until we meet again. Hattab.
Dua Hattab.
Dua Hattab.